In this video, I'm going to show and teach you 10 super practical pronunciation hacks that will change the way you sound in English. I'm not saying that this is going to be a change overnight, but if you practice them, you're going to sound better. This video is useful for anybody who is a non-native speaker of English and wants to improve pronunciation. The problem, even for advanced students, is that we often acquire really bad pronunciation habits because our teachers don't correct our pronunciation as we speak. For each hack we'll be learning in this video, I'm going to give you lots of examples of words that contain this hack, and if you would like to practice pronunciation of these hacks on your own with a listen and repeat file, you can download all of these from my learning community, Your English Upgrade. The link is in the description. And now, without further ado, let's move to our first hack. So, have a look at this word. How would you pronounce it? In particular, I'm interested in how you'd pronounce the ending here. T-U-R-E. This is a pretty common ending in English, right? So, how do we say it? Listen and check. Nature. Nature. What can you hear there at the end? The T-U-R-E in this word sounds practically in the same way as the word chair. Right? The chair that you're sitting on. It's just a tiny bit shorter. Nature. Nature. And pay attention to that A in the first syllable there, because it's also a common mistake for learners of English not to pronounce it the way it should be, as A. Nature. So let's have a look at other words that contain the same ending. Listen and repeat. Nature. Future. Picture. Furniture. Architecture. Structure. Temperature. Gesture. Feature. Literature. Well done. That last one is particularly difficult. And remember that with this one, actually, the A in front of the T-U-R-E is pronounced as E. Literature. Literature. Let's move on to our hack number 2. And this one is to do with how vowels are pronounced with the letter R in English. This is a very common area of difficulties for learners of English because there's no letter-to-sound correspondence in English, and because of that, when learners of English want to read the word the way it is written, they make absolutely terrible pronunciation mistakes. So, to introduce this, let's take a word from our previous list. Do you remember how to say it, right? But now, instead of the ending, which is pronounced as chair, I want you to focus on the first syllable in this word. So how do you pronounce the letters U-R in this first syllable? Listen and check. Furniture. Furniture. What could you hear? How are the letters U-R pronounced here? Well, they were pronounced as the long air sound, right? Listen again. Furniture. Furniture. Now, this pronunciation of U-R happens when the letters U-R are followed by another consonant and they're inside a stressed syllable. It's a little bit complicated, so let me repeat that. When U-R is followed by another consonant, and this is a stressed syllable, we pronounce these two letters as the long sound. Usually, these kinds of combinations of UR followed by another consonant are inside stressed syllables in English, so you're generally not going to go wrong if you pronounce these two letters followed by another consonant as the long as in, for example, furniture. Now, in here, I just wanted to mention that because my accent is British, I don't pronounce the letter R. But in general, you should, if you speak international English, pronounce the letter R. So instead of saying furniture, you can repeat this word as furniture. Furniture. And there's absolutely no problem if you pronounce the letter R. But you need to remember to do it in the soft English way. So it's not the R sound that you were looking for, not the one where your tongue is hitting your palate, your roof of your mouth. It's not the R. No, that sound is different. That sound is the soft English R sound, where your tongue is not touching your palate and it kind of curls back a little bit. So it's furniture. So, up to you how you decide to pronounce that. Regardless of whether you pronounce the letter R or not, this UR in here is going to be pronounced as the long air sound. So let's have a look at some more words that contain these two vowels followed by another consonant. Listen and repeat. Furniture. Urgent. Urban. Murder. Burger. Further. Purchase. Fur. Blur. Well done. Now these last two words, if you notice, end in UR. There is no other consonant after the letter R. But in both of these cases, we pronounce the ending as the long air sound. The only thing you have to remember here is that in here, in order for this rule to work and for you to be able to pronounce UR as the long when it's at the end of the word, there must be a consonant just before the letter U. So, for example, this rule will work here in blur and fur, but it will not work in words such as for or your, because there's a vowel in front of the letter U. So, blur, fur. And this is not the end of our chapter on how vowels and R's are pronounced in English, because now we're going to have a look at two more combinations. So, how about this word? How would you pronounce the IR inside this word? It's pretty easy, isn't it? So let's listen and check. First. First. How are the letters IR pronounced here? Well, guess what? It's the long air sound again. And in here, the rule is practically identical to the previous set of words. When IR is followed by another consonant, and it's inside the stressed syllable, we pronounce these two letters as the long air, or in international English with the soft R sound. So, let's have a look at some more words containing IR followed by another consonant. Listen and repeat. First. Third. Thirsty. Skirt. Firm. Birth. Shirt. Sir. Stare. Well done. And as you can see, again, in those last two words, IR were the two last letters in the word, and they were also pronounced as the long sound. And again, the rule is the same as with the pronunciation of UR at the end of the word. If IR finishes a word, and there is another consonant in front of the letter I, we will pronounce this ending as the long There aren't many words that finish in UR or IR preceded by another consonant, but hey, it's a useful rule to remember. And now, on to our last combination of vowels and R's, and we're going to be looking at some words that students really often mispronounce in English. So let's have a look at the first one. How would you say it? This is a word we use very often, and sadly, because our teachers never corrected our pronunciation, or maybe they themselves pronounced this word incorrectly, we acquired really bad pronunciation habits, and we pronounce this word the way it is written. And that's not the case. As you can imagine, this is not how we pronounce this word. So again, how are the letters O, R pronounced here? Well, let's listen and check. Work. Work. You can say it in the International English accent with the R sound and say work. Work. So what can you hear at the beginning of this word? How were the letters O, R pronounced inside? Surprise, surprise, it was the long again, right? But this time, this rule is a little bit different because we're not going to talk only about OR, followed by another consonant, but the letters WOR, followed by another consonant. So actually, if you pay attention to how those first three letters in this word are pronounced, they sound exactly in the same way as the word where, the past plural form of to be, is pronounced. So basically, for almost all of these words that contain WOR in a stressed syllable, again, that's quite important, but that's like 99% of the cases in English. So WOR followed by another consonant is basically pronounced as where, the past plural form of to be, and then you simply add the ending. In this case, you would say work, work, work. Let's look at more words that contain this combination. Listen and repeat. Work, word, world, worse, worst, worth, co-working, paperwork, artwork. Well done! This is a huge pronunciation hack, so make sure that you practice it, because if you pronounce vowels and R's correctly in English, your English is going to sound miles better. And now let's move on to our hack number 3, and this time we'll be looking at word endings. Have a look at this one. How would you say it? In particular, how would you say the ABLE at the end here? Listen and check. Comfortable. Comfortable. How did I pronounce these last 4 letters here? It wasn't able, was it? That's the problem that a lot of learners of English have. They see ABLE at the end of a word and they want to pronounce it as able, because that's how you would normally say it if it was on its own. But not here. Here, it's an unstressed ending. It receives no emphasis, and because of that, it's pronounced in this very short way, as a bull. So in order to pronounce it correctly, you need to start this with a very tiny vowel sound, And then try to imagine that there is nothing between b and l. Bull. Bull. Now we can argue whether this is one syllable or two syllables long. The ending is pronounced as bull. This is a universal rule that you can apply to any longer English word which finishes in A-B-L-E. And it's going to work 100% of the time because no longer English word that contains this ending is pronounced in a different way. It's always going to be pronounced as bull at the end. So let's have a look at some more commonly mispronounced words that contain this ending. Listen and repeat. Comfortable. Vegetable. Valuable. Variable. Available. Sociable. Miserable. Suitable. Separable. Memorable. And now let's move on to hack number 4. And this is another hack to do with word endings. This time we're looking at AGE at the end. Well, have a look at this word. How would you pronounce this ending here? Listen and check. Village. Village. What can you hear at the end here? I'm particularly interested in how you pronounce the letter A in front of that G there. Listen again. Village. Village. How is that A pronounced? As the short I sound, right? Idge. Idge. This ending sounds identical to how the word bridge sounds at the end. Bridge. Idge. Village. Village. This is another almost universal rule that you can apply to loads of English words that finish in AGE. Again, this is an unstressed ending, and as such it's pronounced in this very, very short way, as idge. In case you're wondering about exceptions to this rule, we have a group of words that come from French, for example, massage, mirage, collage, where, as you can hear, AGE is pronounced differently. But in general, AGE at the end of English words is going to sound as idge, and we've got lots of common examples of this. Let's listen and repeat. Village. Luggage. Image. Average. Message. Damage. Storage. Package. Manage. Advantage. Language. Well done. And now let's move on to our hack number 5, also to do with word endings. And this time we're going to look at AW at the end. So how would you say this word? AW is a pretty misleading ending because a lot of students mispronounce it and say O at the end. But AW is never pronounced as O. In fact, if you said O here, you would completely change the meaning of this word and say low, right? And we don't want to say low when we talk about, how do you say this word then? Listen, law. Law. Can you hear the difference between these two words? Law, that AW is pronounced as the long O sound. It's or. It's a difficult sound for a lot of learners of English because it doesn't exist in their mother tongues. But what we need to do is say o and then extend this sound, keeping the shape of our mouth exactly the same. So we're going to say o, not o. Yeah, can you see the difference? O. This is another universal rule that you can apply to any word in English that finishes in AW. Or, law. We don't have many words like these, but it's definitely worth practicing them. So let's listen and repeat. Law. Saw. Raw. Jaw. Floor. Straw. Draw. Withdraw. Well done. It's a really important hack, as we said, because if you mispronounce these endings, you're going to change the meaning of what you were saying, especially in those first 5 words here. So remember, or. Now, if you like my teaching style and you are interested in doing more pronunciation hacks, make sure you visit my online learning community where you can do my full pronunciation hacks course and take advantage of the weekly live webinars where I can give you personalized feedback on your pronunciation. And now on to hack number 6. Have a look at this word. How would you say the ending here? These words are a nightmare for learners of English because all of those vowels and consonants at the end here are a right mess. Yeah? So, how do we say these 5 letters? Well, in fact, they're just pronounced as only 2 sounds. Listen and check. Bought. Bought. How are these letters pronounced? What did you hear here at the end? It's just the long or sound again, and we have just practiced it, right? So it's or, and then t. Ought. Bought. Again, don't say boat, because if you say boat, you completely change the meaning. So don't change the shape of your lips when you say or. Bought. And now let's practice it in more words. Listen and repeat. Bought. Brought. Fought. Thought. Sought. Ought. And that's not the end of this rule, because we also say ought when we've got AUGHT at the end of these irregular verbs. So we're also going to say caught and taught. It's a very, very useful rule, and make sure you practice it because otherwise you will be confusing your listeners. And now it's time for another hack, and it's another ending. How would you say it in this word? Listen and check. Tourism. Tourism. How are the letters ISM here pronounced? Listen again. Tourism. Tourism. How do I say them? They're pronounced as ism. 2 syllables here, even though we only have one vowel, one letter there, I, but there is a little vowel sound just in between z and m in pronunciation here. Ism. Ism. This is a universal rule for the pronunciation of any English word that finishes in ISM. We pronounce all of these endings as those 2 syllables. Ism. So let's have a look at some more words that contain this ending. Listen and repeat. Tourism, racism, terrorism, sexism, patriotism, organism, journalism, realism, symbolism, autism. Well done. These aren't easy words, so it needs practice. Lots of learners find this ending quite tricky, but just remember, it's 2 syllables long. And it's time now to move on to our penultimate pronunciation hack in this video. And this one is to do, surprise, surprise, with another ending. Have a look. How would you pronounce this word? Listen and check. Basically. Basically, how are these last 5 letters here pronounced? As just 1 syllable, right? As cli. This is a universal rule you can apply to any English adverb that ends in C-A-L-L-Y. It's pronounced as cli. Any of those will be pronounced like that. So let's look at more of them. Listen and repeat. Basically, logically, physically, practically, identically, magically, psychologically, vertically. Pronouncing these endings like this is really going to make a big difference in how people see your English and how people think of your English. So make sure you say C-A-L-L-Y as cli. And now let's move on to our last hack. Well, actually, it's not the last hack. I've still got 2 more to go. So let's move on to now our penultimate pronunciation hack in this video. Have a look, and it's actually 2 hacks. Have a look at this adjective, the ending again. How would you pronounce it? Listen and check. Dangerous. Dangerous. So how did I pronounce the O-U-S at the end of this word? It sounded very, very similar to how the letter S is pronounced in the English alphabet, right? Dangerous. S is just a little bit shorter than S, the letter S from the English alphabet. Dangerous. Now this is a universal rule and a very, very useful one to apply to any English adjective that ends in O-U-S. You can be sure that if you encounter a word like this, it's going to be pronounced as S at the end. So why don't we have a look at more examples then? Listen and repeat. Dangerous. Famous. Generous. Ridiculous. Nervous. Precious. Jealous. Delicious. Conscious. Well done. Now, before we move on to the next hack, I wanted to focus on a really special group of adjectives that also end in OUS, but they are pronounced slightly differently. Have a look at this one. This is one of the most commonly mispronounced words in English by non-native speakers. So how would you say it? Listen and check. Curious. Curious. So can you still hear the S at the end of this adjective? Yeah, we definitely say S, right? Curious. As we said, any adjective in English that ends in OUS is going to be pronounced like this. But this whole ending here in the word curious sounds like the word yes. Again, it's just a little bit shorter than yes, but it sounds very, very similar to yes. So, curious. Curious. There is a small group of adjectives, basically, that finish in IOUS, where this ending sounds practically identically to the word yes in English. We don't have many of them, but we can practice the most common ones. Listen and repeat. Curious. Previous. Serious. Various. Obvious. Hilarious. Glorious. Mysterious. Well done. Just remember that it doesn't always mean that when an adjective finishes in IOUS that it's going to be pronounced as yes at the end. You can definitely count on us, but you need to check in the dictionary whether this adjective you're looking for is pronounced with just s or a full yes. In fact, if you look at the last two adjectives we did in our previous group, that group where we pronounced them with just s at the end, the last two adjectives in that group were delicious and conscious. Both are spelled with IOUS at the end, but we don't pronounce them with the full yes. So, again, check the pronunciation in the dictionary. And now, let's move on to our last hack. And this one is probably the most useful one of all, because this one is to do with the ED endings in English. This is a very complicated area of pronunciation for non-native speakers, because if you make mistakes here, and learners very often do, you confuse your listeners. You completely change the meaning of what you want to say. So, let's talk about the rules. There are basically three ways of pronouncing the ED endings for regular verbs in English. You can pronounce this ending as t, a single t sound that you attach to the infinitive, as d, another single d sound that again you attach to the main verb, and as id, that you attach to the verb as a full extra syllable. So let's have a look at some examples and I'll explain to you how things work and why that is. So let's have a look at examples of ED endings pronounced as t, a single t sound that we attach to the infinitive. Listen and repeat. Picked. Asked. Looked. Stopped. Purchased. Well done. Now let's focus on those verbs that finish in d, a single d sound. Listen and repeat. Played. Failed. Logged. Managed. Realized. It's a little difficult sometimes not to add that extra syllable, right? But remember that if you do add an extra syllable, and for example, instead of saying purchased, you say purchase it, or instead of saying managed, you say manage it, What you're doing is you're actually giving me an order to purchase something or to manage something, right? Manage it. Do it. It's an order with that extra syllable, and you definitely don't want to say it like this when you want to say managed without that extra syllable. Managed, purchased. Really, really important not to add that extra syllable. But, as we said, there are cases where EDs are pronounced as an extra syllable. So let's have a look at a few words that follow this rule. Listen and repeat. Wanted, needed, contacted, hated, ended. So, why is it that sometimes we add the extra syllables and sometimes we don't? Well, the reason is the actual physical mechanics of our mouth. If you look at these verbs here, they all finish in t or d. Now, would it be possible for you to pronounce these words without adding an extra syllable? Let's try. Let's say the first one. Want. Let's try the other one. Need. It's practically impossible. I mean, you'd have to be very, very skilled in order to say d and d or t and d without adding any extra syllable in between. So that's basically the reason why an ed ending can be pronounced as a single extra syllable. So whenever you have a verb that finishes in t or d, you need to add an extra syllable if you add the ed ending to it. So wanted and needed. So let's have a look at our first two groups of verbs. Why do we sometimes pronounce the ed ending as t, and why do we sometimes say d? Well, it's all to do with the type of the sound in front of the ed ending. Let's look at the last two words in both groups that we practiced. The first one, if you remember, was purchased, and the other one was realized. Purchased is pronounced with the t sound at the end, while realized is pronounced with the d sound there. So why is that? In order for me to explain to you how this works and why sometimes it's a t and why sometimes we say d, I need you to do a little experiment for me. Put your hand on your throat and make the s sound. Make it for a long time, as long as you've got air inside your lungs, and pay attention if you can feel anything happening around your throat. So let's do this together. 3, 2, 1. Can you feel anything happening around your throat? Can you feel any vibrations? No, you don't. This means that s is a voiceless sound. We don't use any of our vocal cords when we make s. So that's a voiceless sound. And in general, if you have a voiceless sound in front of the ed, that ed is going to be pronounced as t. If you look at all of these verbs that we have studied here in this first group, all of them finish in a voiceless sound. So that's when we pronounce the ed ending as t. Now let's contrast this with the words from the second group. So let's come back to realized. How does the verb realize, in its base form, finish? How does it finish? What can you hear at the end? Listen again. Realize. Realize. What can you hear? It's the z sound, right? So again, let's do this little experiment that we did before with the s sound. Put your hand on your throat and make the z sound for as long as you've got air in your lungs, and pay attention to what's happening in your throat. Let's do it together. 3, 2, 1. Zzz. What did you feel? Did you feel any vibrations in your throat? Oh yes, absolutely. Your throat was vibrating like a mobile phone, right? This is because you are using your vocal cords, your voice, in order to make the sound. And in all of these cases, when a regular verb finishes with a voiced sound, we pronounce the ed ending as d. Realized. Now this is very, very hard for the vast majority of learners of English, because in our languages, and I say our languages because I'm not a native English speaker, we have the tendency to take our voice away from consonants at the end of words. That's why it's quite hard for us to recognize the z at the end of realize and to pronounce that z at the end of realize. But that's the way we should do it, at least in theory. We should say realize and realized. So is it a big problem if you don't say d, or if you are unable to say d at the end of these words? Well, not really. You're not really going to confuse anybody horribly if you say realized or managed instead of realized and managed. It would be perfect if you could do it, but it's not a big problem. The most important thing is not to add that bloody extra syllable that I hear all the time as a Cambridge examiner in students' speaking tests. So just remember, no extra syllables, and if you can't say zd or jd, as in managed or realized at the end of the verb, just say st or cht. It's going to be fine. Nobody is going to misunderstand you. Now, if you'd like to practice this, if you'd like to learn more hacks like these, and you like my teaching style, consider joining Your English Upgrade, my online learning community, where you'll be able to take pronunciation hacks, the course that I've designed, and other pronunciation courses, weekly challenges, take part in webinars where I meet with my students twice a week, give them personalized feedback on their pronunciation. It's basically worth every second of your time if you're serious about improving pronunciation. The link is in the description. Take care, keep learning, and enjoy that learning process. I'll see you in the next video.